Welcome to the new podcast, In the Garden with Susan. I'm your host, Susan Ladner. I will aim to bring you top quality information on how to save open pollinated seeds, grow a garden, and preserve what you grow. Every Wednesday, I'll be sharing practical tips and techniques to help you on your journey to food security. Join me as I preserve the abundance of produce that my garden provides. Learn new ways of putting food away for the winter and some old ways that are from another century. You can find this podcast on Shopify and at my website. Come on, let's go wander down to the garden and awaken the dreams, history, and love that is held inside every seed. Okay, welcome to another episode. And today we have quite a exciting show. Well, maybe I think so because it's my show. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about the El Nino, and this is all because a friend of mine, and I'm so grateful. He's excited as to when my shows come out. He's probably, I know I have a few friends that find my show interesting, but I had never really thought about gardening during an El Nino year. And I do remember the last El Nino in like 2016. I worked in a greenhouse, and the owner had talked about they were starting some things a lot earlier and going to have things done earlier because it was an El Nino year. And I didn't really give it much thought. However, like we see the effects of the El Nino all around us right now. Like here in Western Canada, it's a lot warmer. We don't have as much snow. It's been raining a lot. I'm not on the coast. In the interior, and it's just not like a typical winter, and this is what the El Nino is. So now when we're going to be getting into gardening season, it's going to be completely different this year. It's going to affect like the western part of North America, and when you get to like the Great Lakes, so anyone is in the central of Canada, but eastern Canada and like sort of like Quebec and up in the north part, they're going to have a different experience. I believe there'll be a lot, they'll have more precipitation, and it might be a bit cooler. And here on the other side of Canada, Western Canada, we are going to be hot and dry, and we're going to be having like a drought experience. So this was making me think about like how are we going to garden this year? So yeah, maybe we should be starting things earlier. And you can get those cloches, or you can get little mini greenhouses, or like the grow tunnels, so you could put things in there. But for gardening in a El Nino year, we have to think about germination is one thing that, if we're putting the seeds in the ground and we're not getting that precipitation, then, should we put them a little bit deeper? Are we going to have to run out and make sure we're watering every day to get those crops up out of the ground? And then Eastern Canada, or like the eastern side of North America, you guys will be having too much precipitation. So we'll have to really watch our seed starts here where I am, and make sure to keep the soil moist while the plants are starting. And this year, especially in Western Canada, Central Canada, water is going to be very precious. And so we're going to want to be thinking about mulching. Mulching will be a huge priority. And another thing, it's good for seed saving, but for food eating, this isn't so good, is plants are going to be bolting sooner. So if we have, our prized lettuce, and, we're growing this lettuce out to eat, and we think, you're going to have it for quite a while. Well, lettuce doesn't last quite a while, but let's say we think we're going to have a stand for 2 weeks, that might bolt and go bitter right away. So that's another thing. A lot of our plants are even well, there's all different things that bolt. But anyway, that's just, I'm not going to get into that now because I'll get totally sidetracked. But another thing is that our tomatoes, which is a big part of today's show, so I'm trying to focus on tomatoes, is that they're going to have excess leaf growth, and just for this coming summer, and the flower formation will be weak. So our tomato plants, our pepper plants, our eggplants, they're not going to have as many fruit on them. So that's something to think, especially if you're a canner like I am. I sort of think about how many plants I'm putting out, and I have my specific area that these are my canning tomatoes. And I look at, and I think because I really love to can a lot of tomatoes and make ketchup and tomato sauce and pizza sauce, and there's just so much you can do, right? And then dry them, and then make roasted tomatoes and put them in the freezer. So if you're a gardener and you just plant one or two plants of tomatoes, or you think you're going to have, oh, I'll have way too many tomatoes. This year you won't. Just maybe put that into the mix, that anything you plant this year that is producing fruit, it might be in an El Nino year, there will not be as many flowers that are coming out. And a huge thing for some of us that love strawberry season is that strawberry season is going to come to an end earlier. And so that's something to think about. If maybe you go to the farmer or some of these you pick places. Oh, and I know I'm guilty of this. When the you pick first opens, it is so busy. There's a lineup down the road, and I've in the past thought, you know what, I'm just going to go to let everybody get their strawberries and I'll go later. And I really like to make a lot of jam because the jam just, it goes so fast. Like, we can't eat jam at our place until the snow flies because it's so delicious. So if you're, into making jam this year, get the jam made right away, because when the heat starts, the strawberries will be finished. And another thing that's going to happen in El Nino year is we'll be struggling with sun scald on our tomatoes and on some of our vegetables. So something to think about, maybe if you see, say, shade cloth, or think about how you could set up some shade cloth, and especially for if you have a greenhouse and you're going to be growing stuff in the greenhouse, it's going to get super hot in there this year. So maybe setting up some sort of shade cloth and ventilation for your greenhouse. And really, water is going to be a big issue in the coming year. So if you're thinking about setting up a garden, maybe also think about if you have drip lines, like, or, how are you going to water this year? And so that leads me into like something that I just have discovered this evening. Well, I shouldn't say this evening, because when I read the book, Gardening When It Counts by Steve Solomon, he talks about gardening when there is a drought. And sometimes when we say it's a drought, it's not really a drought. Like a long time ago, they used to grow gardens and they didn't have irrigation. So you would grow things further apart so that the roots could, get the water. And this evening, as I was doing, looking into the El Nino, I came across some information from Steve Solomon, and I thought it was so synchronistic, because I think he is an amazing author, and he writes, just great books, and he really has influenced a lot of my gardening. And he talks about dry gardening. So I'm just starting to jump into this, and this is why this is so exciting for me. I ordered his new book that came out in 2022. I should have written down the name. I can't think of it right now, but we'll talk about his new book when it gets here. So yeah, this is something that I'm going to, I think, shift my gardening this year to dry gardening. Last year, I was having to hand water because I do live off grid, and there would be water pumped into a swimming pool, and I would scoop the watering can into the pool and, truck in and out of the garden and water by hand. Like I wasn't watering everything every day, but when things did have to get water, because we didn't have a lot of precipitation this year, and that was a little bit of an issue, and I don't want to spend next summer in the garden running around watering all my plants by hand again. So I'm going to really shift into dry gardening. And yeah, so just something about, going into back to El Nino again. It's basically like those in the north are going to have drier weather with warmer temperatures, and natural precipitation will be scarce. And the warmer weather makes it difficult to grow plants that prefer cooler weather. And the crops that succeed the most are suited to temperate and warm weather. So this for me is a huge thing, because I've been focusing more on cold crops because we are in the grand solar minimum. So this summer, especially, I am going to move into some of those longer season crops and those tomatoes that, take 90 days, which I've been shifting away from that and really utilizing, the 60-day tomatoes, the 55-day tomatoes. So I'm going to grow more of, I think, an assortment this year, and put in some of the longer season crops. And also, like, some of those short seasons might be good in case it does get really hot. And also, what I'm going to do, and by no means am I an expert on this. I want to make that disclaimer to everyone. This is just me talking, and I'm talking about what I'm going to do. I really don't want anyone to be like, well, Susan said, because, and it's funny because there are stories in my life when people are, well, Susan said, but this is what I'm going to do this year. And this is based on things I'm discovering. So I really have no idea, is this going to happen? But we do know what an El Nino year is about because there's a history of it. So I'm going to plant earlier. I'm going to get the crops in the ground a lot earlier than I normally would. And I'll have the cloches, or I'll have some, plastic or cover to cover them up if it gets cold, because I'm going to want them to get the roots down in there growing, because I'm going to dry garden. But I don't know how I'm going to dry garden. I'm yet to learn that. So anyway, another thing that we have to consider during this El Nino year is that plants are going to be more at risk by attack by pests and diseases. And I'm not sure if you guys had this problem last gardening season, but the stink bugs and the aphids, like, I've never seen anything like it. And maybe it's because we started El Nino last summer. Like the stink bugs, anyway, I'm going to go off topic if I start talking about those guys, but they were everywhere and they were destroying my tomatoes, and I didn't know what was destroying my tomatoes at first. And then I found out that the stink bugs have this little stinger that comes off their nose, and they poke it into the tomato and under the skin, and they suck out some of the juice, and then they leave these blemishes on the tomato. And you get a whole bunch of those little stingers in there, and the tomato's ruined. And then you get this little white, it's like this sort of white thing under the skin. But anyway, it was very traumatic for me, because I had 105 tomato plants in the garden last year, and I'd seen the stink bugs at first in the corn. And I was like, oh, like, I didn't think they were a problem. Like, saw a few, and then I saw more, and then the tomatoes started coming in, and then I was like, what's happening to the tomatoes? And then there were stink bugs everywhere. So this is a problem. So if you're planning your garden, maybe start planning pest control and be on it before the problem gets out of hand, because suddenly, like, it's a big problem. And also the aphids. Like, I've never seen anything like it, the aphid problem. So anyway, we'll talk about that in later episodes. And so mulch, like, start planning to mulch is going to be, I know in past years, I'm like, oh, I'm going to mulch the whole garden, and I'll mulch a bit. And I do, I'll start part of the garden, but I mean, I think this year is the year I'm going to have serious mulch everywhere, and it should be like 1 to 3 inches of mulch, and drip irrigation. Of course, I said that already. And, if you're going to get shade cloth, get the 30 to 40% weave. And so we're going to expect to have less yield from our, tomatoes and green peppers, things like that. There's going to be less snow this winter going into the spring. So something right now to be concerned about is that, well, what I'm concerned about, I don't know if you guys have to be concerned about this, but I have quite a big strawberry patch out there that I was working on, and they don't have a blanket of snow on them anymore. And I was, so busy in the fall, I didn't put the straw on top of them. So the plants right now, if you're living in an area like I'm living in where we don't have the snow cover, that they don't have a blanket to protect them for when the temperature plummets. Like normally when it starts to get really cold, there'll be snow protecting them. So if you go out in your garden and you see you don't have that blanket of snow, think about something. If you have plants out there that you need to protect, they're going to need some sort of a blanket. I'm going to go throw a bunch of hay all over the place. So, and just something I was touching on for dry farming tomatoes, you're going to want to get them into the ground as soon as you can. And I think this is going to go right across the top for everything. But now let's talk about some positive. There are some good things about this, coming, you know, I don't want to say drought, but maybe it is like a drought, like the reduction in participation or precipitation, is that the plants that are grown with less water and are grown with dry farming, they have a more concentrated flavor. So if you're growing your tomato crop and they're not getting as much water, they are going to have these intense tomato flavor, like they are going to be wonderful. So, and another good thing is winter squash, when it's dry farmed, it'll store longer. Even some of the varieties that don't naturally store for a long time, they will store for a lot longer. So, those are some positives. And now I want to read a little bit. We're going to talk about the tomatoes right now. And so, I think I'll start with, I'm going to go back to the Seed to Seed book by Suzanne Ashworth. I really love this book. And so there's really some good information in here. And so I'm just going to read out of it. And it's talking about the tomatoes. Tomatoes were domesticated from wild perennial species in Mexico, Central America, and South America. When Columbus took tomatoes back to Spain, the plants quickly spread throughout Europe and were considered a poisonous garden oddity. On their way from poisonous to popular, the attitudes of gardeners concerning tomato consumption went through a gradual transformation. The following advice from Harriet Horry's receipt book in 1602 is typical. It is all right, but not advisable, to eat the tomato if it is thoroughly cooked. Tomatoes should never be eaten raw, as death will be instantaneous. Although a rich red color is standard for today's tomatoes, many other colors exist. Heirloom tomatoes, include fruit colors of white, lime green, lemon yellow, yellow with red stripes, gold, persimmon, orange, pink, purple, mahogany, and black. And I just have to say, I have grown a couple of varieties of white tomatoes. They are very beautiful. I just love my red and black tomatoes, though. So we're going to talk now about pollination, crossing, and isolation. The extent of cross-pollination in tomatoes has been a controversy among seed savers for a long time. Some say that crossing is rampant. Others have reported never seeing crossing after years of growing different varieties next to one another. Charlie Rick, whose tomato breeding accomplishments are legendary, describes the evolution of the tomato in Potential Genetic Resources in Tomato Species, 1952. He says, the ancestral tomato species could not reproduce by self-pollination. It had a long style extending far beyond the antler tube to facilitate cross-pollination by insects. As this ancestral species evolved into the wild predecessor of the cultivated tomato, it developed the ability to self-pollinate. With this development, the style became shorter, but still protruded beyond the anther tube. As the tomato migrated northward, the style continued to shorten, and in some species totally retracted inside the anther tube, precluding any possibility of insect crossing. Tomatoes are inbreeding plants. Most modern tomato varieties have totally retracted styles. Such flower structure severely limits and may totally preclude any crossing between these varieties. 3 groups of tomato varieties have been found to have protruding styles. However, currant tomatoes, there's some name, I can't even say the word, sorry. All of the potato leaf varieties and any other fruit formed from double blossoms on beefsteak types. Potato leaf tomatoes have rampant vines and smooth-edged leaves that resemble the leaves of a potato plant. Although not all tomato varieties have been examined, most modern varieties available commercially will not cross with one another due to their retracted styles. Seed savers should therefore have no problem with cross-pollination when growing one currant tomato or one leaf variety tomato, and any number of modern varieties with styles that are covered by their anther tubes. Caging can be used to prevent crossing when more than one variety of the potato leaf variety are grown in close proximity. Double blossoms, commonly seen in amongst of the early flowers of beefsteak tomatoes, often have exposed stigmas, making them more prone to insect cross-pollination. Seeds should not be saved from double fruits for this reason. To determine the style position for any given tomato variety, choose 10 to 20 new blossoms from several different plants. Examine each blossom with a magnifying glass to see if the style is recessed or protruding. Another tube will open as the fruit forms, so it is important to choose newly opened blossoms. Most tomato varieties will set more fruit if the flowers are agitated or tripped. This increases the amount of pollen traveling down the anther tube. The wind usually provides sufficient agitation, but fans are often used to stimulate the wind in greenhouse situations. Daily shaking can also be used to increase flower set in caged plants. Okay, and I know there's some tomatoes that they just have those beautiful flowers, and they're like little mini sunflowers, and the potato, the potato leaves. So just really watch out for that. And when you're planning to save your seeds, usually in the seed description it'll tell you that. And also you can bag. But I think we're going to get into that, and if not, I will talk about it. So, seed production, harvest, and processing. Tomatoes used for paste and slicing are particularly easy for seed saving. The seeds can be saved and the fruit can be eaten or processed without any waste. Pick and wash fully ripe tomatoes, and then cut the fruits across the middle, not through the stem and blossom ends. This exposes the large seed cavities and makes the seeds accessible without mashing the fruit. Now squeeze the seeds surrounding the gel into a bowl or bucket. The same process can be used for cherry and currant tomatoes. However, grinding the fruits is far easier. And this year I grew a variety called Cheesemans, and they were really lovely little. They were so tiny though, like smaller, like they I guess maybe they were like a currant, but I remember I think the currants were smaller, and I just thought, how am I going to save these? So yeah, you can just put them in the food processor when you're collecting the seeds. Okay, so place the clean, fully ripe fruits in a blender or food processor fitted with the metal blade. Process at low speed until all of the fruits are mashed and the mixture is very thick. The small, hard seeds will not be damaged. To aid in seed separation, add 1 cup of water to each cup of mashed fruit and stir. Each tomato seed is encased in a gelatinous sac. The gel in these sacs contain chemicals that inhibit seed germination, which prevents the seeds from sprouting inside the wet flesh of the tomato. In nature, the ripe tomatoes fall from the plant and slowly rot. The rotting away of the fruits is the natural fermentation process during which the gel sacs are destroyed. Eventually, the fruits totally rot away, leaving the seeds on the surface of the soil, ready to germinate when the conditions are right. Artificially duplicating the tomato fruit's fermentation process is not difficult. In addition to remove the gel sac, fermentation also kills many seed-borne tomato diseases. The container of tomato seeds and gel should be set aside to ferment for 1 to 3 days. Fermentation will proceed more quickly as the daytime temperatures increase. During this period, the container of seeds will begin to stink and will become covered with a layer of white or gray mold. Because of the horrible smell, do not keep the bowl in the house or where it might be tipped over by animals or children. And I can attest to that. Sometimes when you're doing the tomatoes in the beginning, you're just like, what is that smell? And then maybe you might remember that you were fermenting tomatoes if you forgot. So, the fermentation process should be stopped when the layer of mold completely covers its surface. Be sure to monitor the process closely because if allowed to continue too long, the seeds will begin to germinate in the mixture. And that has happened to me. I've left them for too long, and then you have all these little mini tomato sprouts going on, and all your efforts are, just wasted. And then you have to throw it away because they're already, they germinated. Okay, so add enough water to double the mixture and then stir it vigorously. The good seeds will settle to the bottom of the container, allowing the mold and debris and hollow seeds to be poured off. Add more water and repeat the process until only clean seeds remain. Some growers prefer to pour the entire contents of the container into a strainer without adding any water and then wash under running water. Make a fist and use the fronts of your fingers to rub the mold and soften debris through the screen. Wipe the bottom of the strainer on a towel to remove as much moisture as possible and dump the seeds out on a glass or ceramic dish to dry. Do not attempt to dry the seeds on soft paper or cloth or non-rigid plastic, as it is extremely difficult to remove the seeds from these surfaces. Coffee filters, which are inexpensive to purchase, reportedly work well and tend to wick the moisture away from the seeds before drying. To ensure even drying and prevent the seeds from bunching together, stir at least twice a day. Never dry the seeds in direct sunlight or an oven. Tomato seeds will begin to germinate if not dried quickly. In hot, humid weather, a fan will help speed the drying process. And tomato seeds will stay viable for up to 10 years, from between 4 to 10 years, depending on the variety and storage conditions. Completely dried seeds should be sealed in an airtight container and stored in a cool, dry area or frozen for long time storage. And so that's from our seed to seed book. And I have actually had some varieties that I they lasted over 10 years, and which was really shocking. I was gonna, I dump out the tomato seeds and reuse the jar, and I just thought, well, I'm just gonna try and grow these, and they grew. So well, it looks like we're at 30 minutes, and I was going to read a little bit out of the Gardening When It Counts by Steve Solomon, but I think I will leave that for now because well, that's our show for this week. I just want to thank you for joining me. Feel free to subscribe and leave a comment if you'd like to. Also, all the links will be in the show notes below. And if you want to look at some more rare heirloom tomatoes, there's a massive tomato base database at the World Tomato Society. You can also look at the Seed Savers Exchange and the Seeds of Diversity, which is free to become a member. And as always, I have tomato seeds on my website at www.gardenfairybotanicals.ca. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.